So I am coming from the peace-building field, so thank you, Emily, for giving sort of a UN perspective on the field of peace-building. So I want to draw on that background to talk about the digital anatomy of bridging divides. So roughly, as a mediator, as a facilitator of dialogue, we look at sort of different stages. They're a little bit like steps, but they don't have to be sequential in terms of the order. As a mediator, when you walk in the room, you first of all shake hands, you smile, you do some norm setting. As a mediator, you're modeling the behavior you want the people in conflict to follow. You're building relationships, you're gathering information, you're deliberating, and then you're generating solutions and making decisions. And so what I've been doing over the last 5 years is mapping the kinds of platforms or the types of affordances and algorithms that can really help with each of these steps. So it's wonderful for me to be here today and listen to the rest of you. And really, I think the stage of this field that we're in is really learning to figure out what are the differences between these types of tech platforms and affordances. So many of these have been discussed, Talk to the City, Polis, there's others, Remesh, the Sci app, Prism View, PonderWiki. Some of these are really new, but these are being designed really by people who have some understanding of the field of peace building. And I think that that's really important, that somehow this is interdisciplinary. It's people who work on deliberation and polarization getting together with people who are working on technology and how do we design platforms in terms of the affordances of what people can do or not do on them, but also then the algorithms as we have discussed today. I want to just jump back to say, the Hewlett Foundation, which is a tech company, really built the field of conflict resolution. And Malka here did some early work with the Hewlett Foundation. Basically, thousands and thousands of people went through Hewlett-funded programs to learn conflict resolution skills. They invested $160 million over 2 to 3 decades of supporting institutions to, these were universities that started programs, the Harvard Negotiation Project, George Mason University's Conflict Analysis and Resolution School. There were 900 grants, 320 organizations, and it's really sort of all these organizations today who are like out there around the world working on the polarization and the division in society, and now sort of a number of us are trying to come back to Silicon Valley and say, hey, we've been working on polarization for decades, and some of what we've learned can be programmed together. There's a lot of different terms for this. They're all very similar processes. I'm just putting the slide up to say, if you've heard it called conflict prevention, conflict transformation, these are all very similar processes that follow roughly that stage that map I showed at the beginning. I'm going to talk about 3 conflict transformation principles. I came from the School of Conflict Transformation, moving from a focus on fixed stakeholder positions toward the deeper interests and human needs. And it's like peeling an onion where people say the first round of a deliberation what they think they want, their position, and then it's kind of revealed in the dialogue, in the deliberation, what they really want. And so the human will is a moving thing. And really what we're trying to design is processes that help people get to the most basic human needs, which usually end up being identity, belonging, respect. And when you start to try to resolve a conflict at that more human level, it's much easier to resolve than I want this land or I'm demanding this land. The second conflict transformation principle is moving from a really simplistic analysis of what the conflict is to a very interdisciplinary, complex understanding. So using economics, sociology, psychology, using these different disciplinary lenses to understand what people are talking about. And the third principle is what we're basically trying to do in all deliberative processes is move from a win-lose framework to a win-win framework, getting people to understand that there is not a fixed pie in most situations. So when you're talking about identity or respect, these are not zero-sum. Everybody can have identity. Everyone can have belonging. We have to design our societies to achieve that. Part of my unique work over the last 30 years has been to look at that process of conflict transformation as both a product of direct, rational, discourse, when people are talking about what they're concerned about, and the symbolic level. And really, you can look at this symbolic versus direct communication mapped onto this process of bridging digital divides. In symbolic and ritual transformation of conflict, you're really helping people move their identity to from us versus them to we, building relationships and really changing perceptions and ideas. That can be reducing perception gaps to sort of moving from those interests to deeper needs. I'm going to tell two quick stories. So my dissertation 30 years ago, when I was in grad school, was on the role of ritual and symbol in conflict transformation. And part of it came because right out of college, I worked in Canada on Indigenous land claims, First Nation land claims, where it was very much, the Canadian government was all powerful and many tribes didn't have a whole lot of rights and they were trying to get their land back. And I was a political science major, so I was looking at the process of this. And First Nation people started every political discussion with the smudging ceremony. The smudging ceremony, an elder lights some herbs in a bowl and takes the bowl around the circle. And in that bowl, there's cedar and sage, different things, and people would wash themselves with the smoke. So they're washing their eyes so that they see good intentions in the other people. They wash their mouth so they say things that are kind to other people. They wash their ears, their heads. They're basically setting their intention symbolically to interact in a positive way with other people. And what I witnessed, as a political scientist trained in a very rational, logical thing, is that these rituals have a big impact in how people talk to each other. A lot of the field of conflict resolution, we were really trying to get people to the prefrontal cortex, where people can do rational decision-making together. But a lot of people enter conflict from the emotional core of their brain, very threatened in terms of their identity, very, symbols are often speaking to that part of the brain more clearly. So I realized it's almost exactly 30 years ago today. I was on the island of Cyprus. I was talking to Jonathan Stray earlier today about the island of Cyprus. There was a civil war, half Greek, half Turkish Cypriot. The UN peacekeepers came along, divided the island in half, and we were there for a 2-week conflict resolution negotiation. I was 25 years old. I was young, and really trying to figure out, how did this conflict resolution thing work? And what I realized is most of the conflict transformation actually happened over dinner, where there were guitars and amazing Greek and Turkish Cypriot food and candlelight, and people were having these symbolic conversations about their identity, enriching their understanding of themselves and the other, not just as Greek or Turkish, but as mothers, tennis players, artists, all the full rich identities that they have. And so I realized that, the rational part is really important where you're negotiating about the conflict. But the more identity, relational work that you do, and I know this is Malka's work now too, the more relational work you do, the further you get along in terms of deliberation and finding that win-win outcome. So what we realized is that sort of setting those humanizing norms and building relationships improves our ability to achieve a mutually satisfying outcome, which we call a win-win. And we want that because that means people aren't going to leave it. It's sustainable. People aren't going to want to continue to fighting if it's mutually satisfying outcome. And that ritual transformation can help groups align on policy options. How does this translate to technology? I think part of the issue with some of the big platforms like Twitter and Meta's, Instagram, Facebook, and really Tristan Harris has talked about this at the Center for Humane Technology. They are designed almost like gladiator arenas where lots of people are sitting in the audience watching, and you have to be fighting in the center to really gather people's attention. So what isn't there in these platforms are ritual signals of, I really want to talk across the lines of conflict. I really want to hear you and understand. I want to find the common ground. We don't have ways of like shaking hands or smiling at each other to say, I'm not a threat to you. We have different views, but I want to understand. So how might we structure technology platforms to enable sort of a going in and out of direct communication and this kind of symbolic communication where we are signaling our positive intention and able to sort of show each other that we're smiling at them, we want to shake hands, we're sitting around a round table with each other. And I think mostly what we're missing is the kinds of affordances and options in those early stages. So I think Polis, Rimesh, Talk to the City are great at information gathering and deliberation, but we don't yet have these really good signals for the symbolic beginning of this trust-building, humanizing process. So just my last 3 slides, I think we could come up with much better identity tags or intention tags to show other people who we are, what our common ground might be, just like those Cypriots found out, wow, they both like swimming or tennis, or these things that made the negotiation over the hard issues actually better because they saw each other in a more rich, complex human way. We could have karma or reputation accrual tags to show I might be asking hard questions, but actually my intention is good, and I have this great history, as you can see from my reputation accrual, that I'm here with a positive goal of listening to and learning from others, et cetera. So those are some ideas about identity and intention tags. There's a whole long list of possible reaction buttons that could be, instead of I'm angry or I'm sad or I like what you're thinking, how do we signal to other people, hey, I see you identifying common ground? A bridge symbol. How about I'm just appreciating your view. Even if I don't agree with you, I can appreciate that that's a really interesting argument and it makes sense from where you're coming from. What if it's really just a clarifying idea, like, wow, nobody's explained that to me before. Now I see the issue in a new way. Or just solidarity with others, that I hear you and I'm in solidarity with the suffering or the sense of pain that you're experiencing. Or just thanks. And then, what are the nudges, coaches, and public service announcements that could be supporting this more symbolic environment? And really, it was eBay that innovated this. Colin Rule, conflict resolution expert, one of the few actually working here in Silicon Valley with the tech companies. The buyers and sellers on eBay get lots of information about what kinds of ways of structuring their complaint to each other that they can give in a way that the other is likely to hear. So they're being coached to be able to communicate effectively and reach that win-win solution. Ideas coming from Twitter are just giving a little flag when somebody posts something hateful. Hey, most users don't do this, or your comment is unlikely to be effective based on its tone. How do we encourage people to listen to each other? At Notre Dame, some of my students are doing some amazing AI-generated sample language to coach people in responding to hate speech. So yeah, this is like my latest research that I'm working on. I've talked with Ravi about it, many of you in the audience. I've learned so much and I really value this Plurality Institute bringing us together to really exchange across these disciplines. Thank you.